Hello, Lee Elliott. Nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
You work for Knifrank, the company. You are based in the UK, in London, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm based in Baker Street, but have a global brief. My responsibility is to look after occupier research for the business on a global basis. So, yes, London, but broader.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you are very active on different social media and a lot of good insight and interesting stuff around coworking because that's your focus. That's your, it's a big deal of what you are covering for Knifrank. Is it right?
Well, I think my job is to look after understanding how occupiers are using space, and clearly what we've seen over the last decade is that co-working for corporate occupiers as well as SMEs has become an opportunity, an option for them, and as a result, my research interests span beyond the conventional market into the flourishing co-working market.
Okay, so that was we took the opportunity of the release of a report recently you had about the evolution of what you call space as a service, and the title of the report was really intriguing because it sums up a lot of what we see as well from our perspective, meaning that it's the power in partnership. So that in your report you took a step back and look at the last decade of what you saw in the London market from the perspective of coworking, and you noticed that there were three phases. One was what you call an uneasy coexistence between coworking operators and the landlords in the real estate market, and likely where there are time to understand it. Then slowly better understanding of what is happening there, and now we are entering what you call the partnership time between operators and landlords. So that was the opportunity really to let you elaborate on that and give you your vision of what was happening now in the market and where it could lead us.
Okay, yeah, really happy to. I think the first thing to say is that there has been a lot of tension in the market, the conventional market, about co-working. The upstarts from the co-working world and what it means for real estate. I don't buy into that. I think what I've said consistently, both in this report and also a report that we did called Your Space, that the co-working phenomenon has changed the real estate narrative for the benefit of everybody in the market. So I'm positive about the experience that we've gone through over the last decade, and I think it shapes the conventional market as well as the co-working market, and gives the occupier, the customer of real estate, ultimately the people that pay the rent and therefore create the income, it gives them options, and I think that can only be a good thing. So I think it's important to just put that out there. But equally, I think we need to start getting a little bit more discipline around what we regard as co-working, what is co-working, what isn't. I think there's a real blur. I mean, you would say this as a researcher, wouldn't you? But there's a real definitional blurring of true co-working, service office, flexible. It's a real melting pot, which doesn't help the market, in my view. So what we've tried to do with this report, Power in Partnership, is articulate how the relationship between the conventional market and the co-working market has matured, and to look at perhaps where it will go next. So maybe if I just give you a sort of a summation of that journey. And clearly, when you try and generalize on a 10-year trend that's global, it's difficult to get all the nuance, but broadly defined, I'd say there are these three phases. The first phase, as you said, was very much an uneasy coexistence. It was really, if I'm brutally honest, the conventional market looking at a wealth of operators coming into the market, and not really an understanding of what they could offer, and just another source of demand, really. I think what we saw was lots of landlords, often with that last bit of space in a building that was difficult to get away in a conventional lease.
The basement. They were putting their co-working offering in the basement, or
So essentially, that bit of space they couldn't get away to the conventional market. They're desperate to get the building let up to either trade or maximise income, and suddenly their doors being beaten down by a range of different operators coming from all directions, and that's why I thought it was an uneasy coexistence. I mean, it was just a case of, right, we'll take that on. and we'll let the building, and actually if there's a benefit for others in the building through doing that, then great, but actually we've got our income.
Yeah.
Now that's, again, a very sweeping generalization, but that to me was the tone of the market 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the tone changed probably 5 years ago broadly, which is that many landlords started to recognize that the provision of flexibility was important for their more conventional leaseholders. In the Your Space research, which I've referenced, we did a lot of work on what the corporate occupiers' attitude, blue chip corporate occupiers' attitude was to real estate, and particularly to co-working. Two things came out of that research. One is real estate's a strategic device. It's something that's really important for occupiers to get right.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, that is a point of difference, because I think what we've heard historically is real estate, particularly since the financial crisis, real estate is a cost you try and manage down. We saw something different emerging, which was real estate as a strategic device, much more aligned to the trajectory of business. So that was the first important point. The second point, because of that, there was a desire to get some degree of flexibility into occupiers' portfolios, either to manage the natural ebb and flow of business or to deal with transformation teams and unexpected demand. And I think as that started to mature, what conventional landlords started to recognise was actually those co-working operators, broadly defined, whether it's IWG, WeWork, whoever it is, smaller players across the spectrum, they could add value. They could actually enhance our ability to attract in conventional lease-in deals, add an amenity provision to the building that creates a richness, and actually provides an overflow for the occupier as well.
Yeah.
And as a result, and again, with broad generalization, what we saw was instead of the co-working deal becoming the last deal that was done, it was often one of the first deals that was done.
Yeah.
Because by creating a co-working space, you activated the building, you got footfall, you had people using the building who might actually say, well, this is actually quite a good spot. Do we need some more space on a conventional basis? And the relationship almost sort of turned on its head.
Yeah.
And I think, that was a positive. And we were dealing with a lot of landlord clients that were keen to understand how to get that piece into play. Many of them did go down the leasing route and basically pass on a lease to an operator, as they did in the first phase, but at a different time in the leasing campaign. But others started to sort of mimic what the co-workers were doing and create their own products. British Land Securities in the UK,
yeah.
With Mayo and Story, started to recognise that this flexibility that occupiers was needing, plus the service provision and experience that came through the offer, was really important. And they started to sort of almost go toe-to-toe with the co-working providers.
How successful has they been with their own brand? Was it at was it at the same level of quality and standard that the pure player of the co-working industry, would you say? Have you seen, or there was still some discrepancies between the quality of the service provided by one or the other?
I think in my experience, they've done it well, but they've done it well within the constraints of their portfolio. I mean, clearly their game is not to sort of broaden into all aspects of the market. They're looking to enhance the value, add value to their existing portfolio, and they've learned the lesson. They've sat back and they've observed, Land Securities in particular went into the flex market historically and came out of it and have gone back in and learned valuable lessons, I'm sure. But they've also observed what's been going on in the market. They've created the right infrastructure around them. I mean, we know that creating a service, it's not a case of just writing flexible lease terms. You have to provide a service, and that creates a cost in terms of human capital and the infrastructure you need to support that. And I think they've been pretty effective at doing that. And as I said, it's really added value to all of their assets where they've applied it. So I think it's been a success. But it's really born out of the recognition that the corporates want some degree of flexibility. So that second phase, I think, is progressive. It's been helpful for the market. It's created, of course, additional options for occupiers and competition for the co-working operators, of course, as well. And you know, not to put too fine a point on it, there are a lot of operators out there now, and I think it's quite a crowded space, and it's a difficult environment in which to operate, particularly as people with greater volumes of ammunition, if you like, start to come into the marketplace. So your membership will know that only too well. So I think where we've now got to is, and I think it's going to be exacerbated actually by COVID, is two things really. One, there's going to be a growing distinction, in my view, between classic co-working and a push towards managed enterprise-led solutions.
Okay.
But just to put my ensure that you're clear on what my definitions are of that, and there may be difference with how you look at the market or your members look at the market. But yeah, I would regard co-working in its classic form as multiple organisations sharing the same floor plate and working cheek by jowl with one another. So, you know, there are no boundaries. It's a membership-based floor plate, and, you know, you could be sitting next to somebody from one company one day and somebody completely different the next. Versus a managed solution, which is a more flexible lease and a service-orientated proposition, but it's for the exclusive use of one institution or one occupier. That's broadly my definition. I think co-working, in its classic sense, as per my definition, is quite difficult to understand in the COVID environment. You know, if we're going into a world where social distancing is in play, as it is now, and who knows for how long, where you have to have 2 meter distancing, and organisations are very worried about contagion and the risk of disease transmission, that classic piece of co-working is more challenging. I think we have to acknowledge that, as difficult as that might be.
Yeah. And
on top of that, we've got a number of operators that have probably challenges in their financial model, in the sense that they bought at the top of the market, they've taken leases, bought long, selling short, and they've also seen the SME market be quite challenged financially. So all of those things are quite powerful and damaging in the short term.
You're speaking about co-working operators.
Correct, okay. Correct. And, you know, and I think, you know, people will understand that. That is as hard as it sounds, that is an operational reality at the moment. On the flip side, the flexible managed solution, I don't see there any let up in demand, and I don't see COVID reducing demand for that. In fact, I see it as increasing demand, which is why we believe there's a third phase of power in partnership. We actually wrote the paper prior to COVID, but actually I think the lens of COVID is actually quite powerful in amplifying many of the messages we made. If I may, and I know I'm talking for a long time, but
no, go ahead.
Four things that I think are going to drive the flex market in an immediate and medium term post-COVID world. Starting with the short term, firstly, we know that occupiers, as lockdown measures start to ease, they go back to their office buildings, and the office buildings in conventional terms are at probably 50% capacity. Because, you know, you've got to respect that 2 meter distancing. You can't get people into the space that you've traditionally had, so you have to make some choices as to who goes into the office and who doesn't. That leaves organisations with 2 choices. One, you either let people continue to work from home, and clearly a lot of people will do that. Yeah. But there will still be some organisations that are unsure about that as a long-term strategy, and I think they'll have recourse to go to the flex market to deal with that capacity issue. So I think that will drive the flex market in the short term. Secondly, we know that there were many occupiers that were in the process of relocating or going into new space, whether it's a refit or whether it's a new development. And we know that COVID will impact on the deliverability of those schemes short term. So, you know, occupiers are left going, well, okay, I've moved out of this building, but I don't have the new one to go to. Yeah. They will have recourse to go to the flex market as well in the short term. Probably not at their cost, but they will still need a flex offer. So they're both short-term drivers.
Yes, it's more like those 2 options you see, it's more like a backup to deal with the current situation. Yeah.
So that is about building resilience, you know, ensuring that you can continue to operate as a business in the short term as we get through this crisis, however long that may take. Yeah. And then I think there are two longer term drivers, which I think are really interesting for the what I'm defining as the flex market. Firstly, as we come out of this crisis, and I would suggest that at the current time, where are we, end of May, I think we're probably looking at 2021 onwards, by which time we've probably got some kind of pharmaceutical intervention to deal with COVID at least.
Yeah.
One hopes, fingers crossed. Yeah, but 2021 onwards, the operating environment for most corporate occupiers is quite uncertain and probably quite volatile. And we can already see, if you look at the CFO sentiment indicators, they tend to be very choppy, and I suspect that's what they're going to be for a while. So when you get that operating uncertainty, what you find is occupiers want to align their real estate to that uncertain horizon. So they like to go short on leases wherever they can. And I think that will drive, as a result, more flexible product. So that's the third driver. And then the fourth driver is one of the consequences of COVID is that whilst we've got people all connected on Zoom calls and the like, and Zoom's astonishing, isn't it? I mean, I wish I used my research to drive my own investment decisions, because you would have bought shares in Zoom.
Sure.
10 million people at the end of last year had registered users, 300 million today. I mean, it's astonishing. But that side, where we are going is a digital transformation of business post-COVID, because whilst we've connected people together, a lot of businesses have been found wanting in being able to sell their services and products digitally. So we're going to go through massive business transformation. And what we see, and what we've seen historically, is when businesses go through transformation agendas, they often create transformation teams that they like to put outside of the mothership.
Yeah.
And they'll use flexible space to do that. So there are two drivers longer term that we see as being important. So corporates will continue to want flex for the reasons I've outlined. They'll want to go to the market, but they'll want certainty that the operator is solid enough, robust enough to provide the option and survive.
Yeah.
What we think will happen, and this is the third phase that is the central point of our report, is that we will see a partnership arrangement start to emerge, whereby operators on the one hand will be less keen to take on leasing risk because of the financials related to that model. But know that they've got an operational expertise that the conventional landlords don't have. And on the other side, the conventional landlords know they're going to have the product, but they don't necessarily have the expertise or the appetite to take on huge headcount to drive a service. And therefore you get a meeting of minds, and you get this power in partnership where operators join with property owners to create a perfect solution. It would, I would argue it's sort of akin to what we've seen in the hotels market with an OpCo type model. And, it may not be new to everybody that's listening into this, but I think we see that as a significant next step in the evolution of the flexible market.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we hear about more and more, the analogy between the hotel industry and the co-working industry, where you see drivers such as or new models arriving, like managed services, this kind of partnership, so that we have seen in the retail industry, if I'm not wrong, in retail parks, which are dealing in that way with the asset owned by a third party and the services operated by another one. And that co-working could move toward that direction, also with the rise of the franchise. That could become something more and more important. Are you seeing that? Because your report is also very much focused on London, and you mentioned that in the report that I think there was 3 times more capacity in London from the co-working's perspective than in New York City, for instance. Is it something that you think is much more valid for the London situation, also because of the density of the traction, and not maybe less to a lesser extent in other areas? Or no, you see that globally transversal, it's deep changes that is taking place nowadays?
Well, I think there's 2 responses to that. So if you'd asked me that question without COVID, the answer would have probably been a little bit different, because I think what we would have seen is the primary cities globally, London, New York, all the usual suspects, steadily moving in this direction, but probably with London at the forefront. And I have to be careful. I'm an Englishman. And I'm a Londoner. So, you know, I have to be careful about bias here. But I do think if you look at the stats, we know there's been an explosion of co-working in London, and we know that's at the forefront, but others would follow.
Yeah, yeah.
However, I think COVID has changed the dynamic somewhat, because what I think might happen with COVID is that we will see occupiers, and I'm talking again corporate end of the occupation spectrum, but I think we will see occupiers starting to disperse their portfolios. And the so-called hub and spoke model of occupancy, I think, will start to really come into effect. And I think in the context of London, what you'll see is possibly slightly smaller but better hub offices, and the emergence of satellite offices in the suburbs in and around London that give people a working closer to home option. So not at home, but equally not in central London either. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity for many of the co-working operators, both the established IWGs of this world, but also some of the smaller players.
The independent crowds of
to start to put facilities in and around the suburban ring, not just of London, but of other cities. And you know, prior to COVID, I was very fortunate with the Your Space research to tour pretty much around the world with this research. And you can see that hub and spoke model even before COVID starting to take effect in Australia. We even saw it, believe it or not, you know, I was privileged enough to go down into Nairobi in Kenya and look at that marketplace, which you would think would be a million miles away from flexible and co-working. But actually, the best-in-class buildings have that. So I think it is a universal trend. I think there are always leaders in this, and I think London is ahead. But I also think COVID is going to sort of broaden the opportunity to a multiple of geographies.
Yeah, we had the discussion with some other players in Germany, for instance, where because there has been always, if we take the perspective of the employers, discussion was always either home working or work at the HQ or work at co-working. It was or and not and.
Yes.
And what we had in mind is indeed that this, and also that's a learning from the COVID crisis, that home working is great and works, and to the big surprise of a lot of companies and managers. But on the other hand, it has its downsides, which are working from your kitchen among your children. That's not always the best way to operate. So working from the HQ due to the social distancing measure, but on beyond that, it's also a whole model that everybody figures out has reached some limits in terms of if you have to spend 2 to 3 hours in commuting to go to the HQ. It increased the price of the real estate, the cost for the company. It creates desertification effects in the countryside. There are so many downsides that we are aware of, but never figured out that there was a solution for. That now all of a sudden we say, yeah, but why not? And indeed, this idea that maybe the next model we could figure out for employees could be maybe 1 day a week home working, 2 days a week going to the head office, and 2 days a week near work, going to a co-working space next door and work from there. Do you believe that it could step by step be the kind of model we could see taking place overall and on a more standard level?
I do see that as an outcome, but I don't see it as an outcome that occurs, you know, in a year's time. I think it's a 5-year play.
All right.
I think, just to touch on your point, I think we've been terribly binary in real estate as a provider of space. You know, to your point, you know, the definition is you either work from home or you work in the office. There's nothing in between. And I think the great legacy of COVID will be that it will focus people's attention to the fact that work going forward is dispersed. And it's multiple. It takes place in multiple settings. I mean, it's been really fascinating in this last week to hear about Facebook and Twitter and all of these companies, you know, leading edge tech companies who have fantastic real estate facilities historically. And it's been positioned in the press as saying, well, actually, they're going to close all their offices down. Not what Twitter said at all. I mean, if you look at the Twitter announcement or indeed the Facebook announcement, what they said was, we are going to give our staff choice.
Yeah.
We're going to allow them to work from home, but equally, we're going to allow them to work from the office should they wish.
Those companies might save money on the free food they're providing.
Well, maybe, but what they will do is they'll give people choice, and they'll be able to therefore attract the very best talent. They'll use real estate in a more appropriate way to be productive, to have the best talent, and therefore to be the most competitive organisations. And one of the lines I've been using a lot in the last couple of weeks with press and all the various engagements that the one's been getting because of this crisis is, the office of the future is a choice, not an obligation.
Yeah.
And as a result, occupiers have to start thinking about space in a very different way. They have to give people a reason to invest in their commute to come into town, or give them an alternative to their home. And this is particularly true of young people. I'm sort of a little bit long in the tooth now. I've been around a while, so and I'm really blessed in that I've got a pretty nice house and I've got a study and I can separate work from home. But not everybody in the start of their career has that option. And moreover, those people that are in the start of their career, if they don't go into the office, they miss all that valuable tacit learning that you get by going into the office. Yeah. Whether it's a co-working facility, a flex space, or a conventional office, our ability to learn and develop our expertise is actually quite soft. It's about the interaction that you have with people in an office environment. And I get quite worried when we have this binary discussion about, we're all going to work from home in the future. If we do that, our younger staff members are going to really suffer in terms of their education and their development. But I don't actually see that as what most occupiers are saying. What most occupiers are saying is, we need a range of different environments. We might need to think about using them in a different way to address sustainability concerns, to address cost concerns. But we're going to be more sophisticated. And part of that mix is a flex offer.
Yeah. No, it's very insightful. It's very, very interesting. And to another extent, it shows us also that, but we see that with the homeschooling for the moment that we see is virtual, that it becomes much more effective, much more transparent. So, and all of a sudden it gives also the impression that we have read that as well, that online meetings were way more effective and shorter than physical meetings in the head office. So to some extent, people hope that this jump in productivity that it's coming from the forced home working and also the usage of all those online tools could release some time to make more of this soft hangout and sharing that you were mentioning. It's so important also in the creative process and innovation and also sales process to some extent.
I think that's true, but what I would say is, and my own sort of personal learning from this as much as anything else, I've been locked down for 8 weeks. As I said, I take 10 steps from my second floor up into my study, and the kids are lucky if they see me for 12 hours. Maybe they're thankful for that. I don't know, but what's quite interesting is that this enforced period of working from home has been positioned by many as being effective.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure in the long run it is effective.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. So I think you're absolutely right that we can have really effective Zoom calls, for example, and exchange ideas for 30 minutes. And then we don't have to worry about our next meeting, But what I'm finding, and maybe it's just because I've got views on the future and, that's very much here and now, is I'm going from one Zoom call straight onto another one. And onto another one, and onto another one. And before you know it, you spent 8 hours talking to people without any thinking time, which is pretty important for a researcher like me. So actually, I'm sort of saying increasingly to colleagues, I can't wait to get back to the office, not necessarily because I'm going to be doing anything different in the office, but actually that 30-minute commute, I'm lucky I've only got 30, not 74 minutes, but that 30-minute commute into town is a really important time for me because it gives me time to set myself, to think. And actually the meeting, the travel between meetings that I typically had going into different offices in London was always really helpful in just giving you that breathing time that you no longer have because you press the button to end one call and you press the same button to start the next one with about a 2-minute gap.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very
And
true.
I worry a little bit that we're not balanced in our debate about how effective we are. And I think it's all about balance for me. And I think we need to recognise that there is a risk of people burning out by working from home. And again, coming back to where we started, a flexible office space might be a really good safety valve for people to actually not encroach upon their family life, not on their home life, and actually keep work in a box.
Yeah.
And I mean that figuratively, of course, that, you know, there's an opportunity for us to have a place where we can go to be productive and work, but also that we know there's a boundary when we get into the home that I think at the moment is being lost a little bit.
Yeah, it's very true. To come to a hand and come back to the partnership part, do you see that all those co-working brands that we know of course, there was the WeWork effect, we didn't mention it, but it had dramatic impact on the acceptance of the model and saying that it was trustworthy at the end. But now it has the flip effect that it needs. We see with the problem that everybody wondered whether it was a good idea to, you know, lease out so many space to WeWork. But still, we see that the model behind it is still working. People are looking for it. Do you see the same operators who lease those infrastructure being the office managers and facility manager of those landlords that we were speaking about, or do you see other players coming up to do that?
I think the general direction of travel in the market is a little bit of consolidation, if I'm honest. I think we've seen a lot of people create co-working businesses, trying to either mimic or advance the model that others like WeWork have brought to the table. And, you know, I think there is, frankly, too many of them, and it will have to rationalize. But, you know, rationalization is painful. I'm not going to get away from that. You know, there will be casualties through the current crisis, for sure. But out the other side, I think, you know, what I would see in a more positive way at the moment is this current environment is a bit of a crucible for some further innovation. And I think you will see some organizations maybe coming left field from the hotels or hospitality sector, suddenly going, actually, all these landlords, you know, they've got great spaces, but they don't either have the skills or the capacity to really activate the space and make it compelling as an experience as well as an environment. I mean, the reality is, and, you know, I can be equally hard on conventional landlords because I think they do a brilliant job at creating best-in-class building environments, but they let themselves down often by not having a great service layer that creates an experience for people. And as I said earlier, you're going to need, the business of real estate now is not just about a good physical environment, it's about having a good experience as well. So I think you will see people coming out of the hospitality sector, maybe even elements of the retail sector actually, where, you know, experiential retail has been at the forefront of a difficult operating environment. We might see them coming into the office environment and creating that service layer in partnership with the people that own the product. So yeah, I think there'll be some casualties and there'll be some pain. I think there'll be some consolidation off the back of that, where people scale up by bringing themselves together and creating JVs. And I think you'll see landlords starting to look at who's out there that could give us that service layer that's the point of difference.
Awesome. Good. Very
helpful.
No, it was super helpful. Thank you so much for the time and for sharing your thoughts about it. We will share the report as well, with the link to the report, and
absolutely,
because it's super interesting. Again, stay safe home. I hope you can get out as soon as possible. We hope we see the light now with the pandemic.
There's always light there. There's always light there. So yeah, same to you as well.
Thank you so much. Let's keep in touch and take care. And I hope we can meet physically quite soon.
I look forward to that. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Lee. Bye bye.
Pleasure. Thank you.